Hello, everybody. Welcome in. My name's Andy Herman. This is the Saturday edition of the Pack a Day podcast. Thanks as always for joining me. Let me start off by addressing the elephant in the room. I know some of you may be a little bit upset. I made some controversial statements on Twitter on Friday night. I was not inebriated. I made these completely sober, and I just want to own up to them right now. If you were not aware, the statements that I made include Thanksgiving food, quote, sucks, bacon is, quote, overrated, and seafood is, quote, inedible, and it went on from there. I do have a prepared statement that I would like to, I don't really have a prepared statement, but I do want to go over this really quick because this was really fun and entertaining to me. I got ratioed pretty bad on Friday night for what I realize are my horrible food takes. I do have the palate and the taste buds of a 3-year-old. I totally get it. It works for me. I don't know why. It shouldn't. It's probably why I don't have a gallbladder anymore. But it is what it is. It was a lot of fun. You guys are very passionate. I'm fairly certain I lost about 5 to 10 followers on Twitter just based on my food takes, which, if we're being real, I deserved. So I get that. But I know Dusty and Sarah and Steve on their Pack a Day podcast get into some pretty hardcore food takes, usually about Oreos. And I know there's been this idea floated about the Snack a Day podcast instead of the Pack a Day podcast. And maybe they can have me on and make fun of me for a good hour for my horrible food takes. I know Andrew Merteg is mostly on my side, so Andrew, I appreciate you, but this was all in good fun. I appreciate all of the banter back and forth. Not so happy with the people who unfollowed me for my food takes. Come on. But it's all in good fun, and you guys had a lot of passionate takes. Some of you were very fearful for my safety and well-being, which I appreciate. Zach Cruz had a tremendous quote when I listed all the foods that I do eat. He said, guys appreciate Andy's content now while he's still with us, which is fantastic. And just overall, you guys are tremendous. The best group of followers I could ever ask for. And again, it's all in good fun, so I appreciate you so much. But I know you're not here to talk about food, even though I could do it for well longer than the 10 minutes I want to keep you for. I do want to get to today are my 5 most disappointing Packers so far this season. I went over my 5 most surprising Packers who have really, exceeded my expectations so far this season. Well, you have to kind of go over the flip side as well. Maybe 5 Packers through the first quarter of the season who maybe haven't met my expectations or at least have been some level of disappointing. I think the really good news here is this was kind of tough to pick a list of 5 because there haven't really been too many disappointing players. But I'll go through it. I'll go from number 5 to number 1, meaning that number 5 is the least disappointing of the 5. Number 1 is the most disappointing. Number 5 on my list, and this kind of just goes to show how good the Packers have been this year. Number 5 on my list was Adrian Amos. And it should be noted first and foremost that Amos is grading out for me right around about a neutral level player. He had a good game this past week. The first 3 games he graded slightly in the negative. Wasn't anything egregious. Didn't have the greatest start to the season. And if you take his 18 games last year plus his 4 games this year, Green Bay got exactly what they were expecting in that free agent contract. But the season so far has started out a little bit below average for what I would normally expect out of Amos. And I do think to some extent when you sign a player to the deal that Amos got, you want a little bit more playmaking. And it should be fully noted that when Green Bay signed him, they knew that this is more of a steady hand, really solid, maybe not spectacular safety who's going to do a lot of the small things well, not going to make mistakes, probably not going to make the biggest plays in the world. And to also defend Adrian Amos, Mike Pettin doesn't always do the best job of putting Amos in a position to be a playmaker. He's keeping his safeties back a lot. If he is bringing a safety up, a lot of times it's Darnell Savage with his speed and aggressiveness. So Amos doesn't get a lot of those opportunities. But when you're not a playmaker, when you're not making those big plays, you have to perform with a level of consistency to, again, make the money that he's making and earn the contract that he got. Through the first few games, it was a little bit below par. Game 4 was much better. And again, overall, he's been about a neutral level player through 4 games. So I think, again, it just goes to show how strong this team has been. If the 5th most disappointing player on the team so far is Adrian Amos, who is maybe a little bit below where my expectations would be for him, that's overall a good sign. But at number 5, I've got Adrian Amos. Number 4 is Dean Lowry, who is actually my lowest graded player on the year, so maybe it's a little surprising that he's only number 4. But if I'm being totally honest and transparent, I just didn't have Dean Lowry that high on my expectations this year. I will say that he is below the level of expectations that I would have expected. What you usually get out of Dean Lowry, in a 5-game stretch is 1 really good game, 1 really bad game, 3 average to below average games, somewhere in that realm. And it kind of evens out. It's usually a little bit below average through the course of the season. But in this game, in this season, I should say, so far through the first 4 games, he hasn't really given much of anything to the Packers. He's not been a good pass rusher. He's been on the ground way too often. You see him get washed out of running plays from time to time. He's not holding up at the point of attack. He used to be somebody that, would from time to time, get his hands up and deflect some footballs. He hasn't been doing that. So this is a week for self-scout for the Packers. I think they really need to self-scout and take a look at Dean Lowry and see if they want to continue to give him that starter status and a bunch of snaps, because in my opinion, especially when Kenny Clark is back, Kenny Clark and Kingsley Keke should be 1 and 2. Lancaster should be 3. And I think it's time to get Montravius Adams a few more snaps and less for Dean Lowry. Let's see if Dean Lowry can maybe thrive with maybe like a 12 to 16 snap count rather than like a 30 to 35 snap count. See if maybe less is more and he can make a little bit more of an impact in that sort of way. But at number 4 on my list is Dean Lowry for most disappointing player so far this season. Number 3 is Jace Sternberger. Just hasn't done really much of anything so far. He had a nice catch last week against New Orleans down the field. We've seen him, get open a little bit on some of that play action boot fakes, but he hasn't done a ton. A lot of his catches have been wide open, basically schemed open. He's done okay, yards after the catch when he's caught the ball, had a couple big drops early in the season, but a lot of people, myself included, really expected Jace to take that step. Kudos to Ross Uglum for really pointing out, usually the tight end jump is usually in year 3, year 4. And to be fair to Jace Sternberger, he basically lost a huge chunk of his freshman season back in 2019 due to injury. So I still think Jace Sternberger is going to have a lot to say about the tight end position for this team through the course of his career here. But I think a lot of people were expecting a little bit more and maybe a little bit more readiness from Jace Sternberger in year 2, maybe to take that jump sooner rather than later. It hasn't happened so far. We'll see what happens the rest of the season. But outside of Jace Sternberger on offense, there's really nobody to be disappointed in. So I guess he's kind of the one that I would point out on the offensive side of the ball. Nothing egregious. Again, kind of like Adrian Amos. Hasn't been terrible, hasn't been bad. You still see him used in a variety of different ways, and I think he's going to get more playing time with Josiah DeGuara out for the season. We'll see what he can do with it. I'm still very hopeful, but it's been a little bit disappointing so far. Number 2 on my list, Christian Kirksey. For a couple of reasons. One, I think he really worked the rust off through those first couple games, missed so much time the last couple seasons, was out injured, and then comes back. I think he was still kind of getting his legs under him. To me, he looked a step slower this year than he did in his previous tape with the Browns prior to injury, so that's definitely a little bit concerning. He does bring a level of physicality, which you like to see. Green Bay was using him as a 3-down linebacker, though. I think when he comes back healthy, first of all, it's going to be interesting to see how they use him if Chris Barnes continues to play the way that he does, depending on what Ty Summers does, and then what happens when Kamal Martin comes back. They may have to really rotate those guys in and out. But I think you want to use Christian Kirksey more on rundowns, specifically as that physical linebacker, maybe not so much on your nickel and dime. Raven Green looked really good in that nickel linebacker role again this past week, so they're going to have some pieces to move around. This is a pretty decent contract for Christian Kirksey. This is somebody that they expected to come in and plug that inside linebacker role and really be somebody that they could count on. He didn't perform up to that expectation, then got hurt, is going to be out for at least the foreseeable future. We'll see what happens as the year goes on. I still think this is going to be a player who has talent and can help Green Bay through the rest of the season. But I think overall through the first quarter of the year, it's been a little bit of a disappointment. And last but not least, Preston Smith. I discussed him on my defensive grades for the season. Just hasn't been anything near what he was a season ago. A major disappointment so far. All 4 games graded in the negative after only 2 games through 18 games a season ago where he graded in the negative. His average grade per game is massively down. It was like a plus 0.5 last year. It's like a negative 0.6 this year. So just a totally different ball player. You're talking about somebody at plus 0.5 right around there as a very plus player that's going to help you win games. A negative 0.6 is going to help lose you games. It's not getting the job done. For a player like Preston Smith, who we saw what he's capable of, that has to change. This has to be a big bye week for Preston Smith. He needs to come back rejuvenated and really start putting some pressure on the quarterback, setting the edge a little bit better, being a better run defender, and really just being a better overall player than what he's shown through the first 4 weeks of the season. All right, no more food takes for me for a while. Thanks as always for listening. Make sure to check out Andrew Mertag on today's Pack-A-Day podcast. As always, I'm out of here. Go Pack Go.